The pale light of dawn struggled through the dust-choked air as she stood alone on the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon with a fierce quietness. The weight of centuries whispered in her bones, fierce and unyielding. Yet beneath that steely gaze, there was a flicker of something softer, something like hope, fragile but not broken. Behind her, the settlement stirred, a handful of weathered cabins clinging to the edges of a barren valley, where every day was a battle, etched in sweat and grit. The land stretched out beneath the wide, uncaring sky, a wild and relentless expanse where the wind roared with ghosts of lost dreams and unsaid prayers. This was a place where survival often meant sacrificing everything, where trust was a currency rarely spent and even more rarely earned. The settler who approached her now carried the wariness of that harsh world in his slow, measured steps. Years of struggle etched deep into the lines of his face, a man more accustomed to loneliness than companionship. He offered a marriage, not born of love, but born of necessity, a pact carved out of desperation in times when alliances were often the only shield against the encroaching dangers beyond the valley's rocky edges. To her community, this union was a breach of tradition, a tentative thread stretched thin between commitment and uncertainty. To his, it was a gamble, a hope tethered not to romance, but to survival, with skepticism shadowing every gesture. Between them lay a chasm wide as the prairie itself, yet their fates now bound by that fragile agreement. The first moments were thick with unspoken tension, words measured and careful, revealing little but betraying everything in the flicker of eyes and the stiff set of shoulders. She held her silence like armor, her proud heritage cloaking her like the morning fog, wary of a world that had not always been kind to her people. He, hardened by years of solitary toil, found himself disarmed by the quiet strength she carried, a power not drawn from weapons, but from the roots of her spirit, deep and unshakable. They began to tread this uncertain path together, each step heavy with the weight of old prejudices and new fears. Yet within the guarded exchange of glances, something unspoken stirred, a fragile ember amid the ruins of lost hope. This wasn't a bond born overnight, but an opening of cracks where light might one day seep through. The settler, long resigned to the cold solitude of the frontier, felt the first crack in his walls, and she, steeped in the traditions of her ancestors, sensed something like possibility where there had been only resignation. But as twilight bled into the valley and shadows thickened around their tentative accord, a revelation shattered the fragile calm. The settler uncovered a secret, whispered on the wind, and carried in the weight of her silence. A truth that threatened to unravel not only their uneasy peace, but the very thread binding their futures. A past she bore silently, a past that might kindle both danger and hope in equal measure. Their uneasy alliance now faced the test of a secret unearthed, setting fire to the fragile hope kindling between them. The question remained, could their tentative union withstand the old wounds that refused to heal? Or would the harsh realities of the frontier snuff out the fragile light they dared to kindle? Many fellow travelers who've walked these forgotten frontier trails told us the winds of destiny, or YouTube's sneaky algorithm, sometimes slip and undo their subscriptions without warning. Before the next perilous path unfolds and new twists come to light, take a quick moment right below this video to make sure you're still signed up with our band, so you don't lose track of the story's thread. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The settler's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, the uneven ground crunching beneath his boots. The secret she had held close, like the silence of the desert after a storm, was no longer hers alone. He spoke low, barely above a whisper, yet his words cut through the fragile calm with the precision of a sharpened knife. "I know what you carry," he said, voice thick, not with accusation, but with a strange mixture of awe and fear. That which could either bind us tighter or tear this fragile piece apart. She met his gaze, the pale light of dawn casting shadows beneath her cheekbones. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath between them. Then she stepped down from the ridge, slow and deliberate, as if descending into the depths of her own memories, memories that stretched far beyond the cracked earth of the valley and into the bloody trails of losses long ago. "Do you think you're ready to face what lies beyond?" she asked, her voice both a challenge and a plea. The river of history between them pulsed with unspoken dangers, hatred born of neglect, and the ghosts of battles neither wished to relive. Yet beneath that fierce exterior, something deeper, maybe even hope, was beginning to stir. His jaw clenched, the weight of solitude pressing heavier on his broad shoulders than ever before. "What choice do I have? The settlers won't wait for us to be perfect partners. They see the Apache in you as a threat, and me as a fool for siding with one." His voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability hidden beneath years of hardened isolation. She stepped closer now, so close that the desert air seemed to shorten between their faces. "Then we make them see, not with guns, but with what we build here. The land, the people who still believe there's something worth fighting for beyond revenge." For a moment, the tension between them softened. Two souls, battered and wary, finding fragile footing. They knew all too well the precariousness of their pact. Like a rope stretched taut between cliffs. One false move, and they would fall. Their first days passed in silence more often than not. They worked side by side, hands calloused and hearts cautious, tending to the wounded fence line, burying yesterday's broken dreams beneath the scrub grass. Even under the relentless sun, the small acts of cooperation wove threads of an unlikely alliance. Yet the settlement was restless. Whispers curling like smoke through the dry air. Doubts, warnings, old resentments resurfacing with every glance cast their way. Neighbors once indifferent now watched with narrowed eyes, their suspicion growing like the tumbleweeds drifting unchecked over the cracked earth. Late one evening, as the moon hung low and silver over the valley, the settler sat near the fire, the flickering flames reflecting the turmoil churning in his chest. She emerged from the shadows, her silhouette framed against the endless night. Her fingers clutched tightly around a tattered piece of cloth, embroidered with the faded markings of a people many had long tried to erase. "I found this," she said softly. "Belonged to my father, a man who fought to protect what little hope we had left." The settler traced the line of the embroidery with a trembling hand. "Hope," he echoed. "That's what we need more of, out here, for them, for us." Days turned into weeks. The fragile bond was tested again and again by harsh weather, the relentless encroachment of rival claim jumpers, and the ever-present danger of patrols that did not tolerate alliances such as theirs. Each night, their conversations grew more honest. Peeling back the layers of pride and pain, she spoke of her people, of battles lost and lives stolen, of ceremonies under moonlit skies and the sacred ties to this land that stretched back beyond the reach of settlers' maps. He shared his own shattered past, love lost, family broken, the heavy cost of solitude. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridgeline, dust trailing like a ghost behind him. The settler's heart clenched. News from beyond the valley was rarely good, and this visitor's arrival heralded changes their delicate peace could not withstand. The rider's eyes were hard, his words sharp as a snake's bite. "There's talk of a patrol coming through at first light," he warned, voice low but urgent. "They've been hunting Apache sympathizers. Anyone who dares to cross that line, you'll both be marked." The settler and the woman exchanged a glance, heavy with unvoiced fears. Every step they had fought to take together suddenly threatened to crumble beneath the weight of old hatreds. As darkness swallowed the valley whole, they sat side by side, the crackle of the fire matching the rapid beats of their hearts. The question loomed large. How far would they go to protect this fragile union? How much blood would be spilled before the land finally granted them a chance to breathe? She reached out, fingers brushing against his hand. A silent promise in the cold night. "We've already lost too much," she whispered. "But sometimes, loss teaches us what worth holding on to." Their eyes locked, a new resolve forged in the crucible of shared vulnerability. The frontier was unyielding, yet in that moment, a spark kindled, a defiance that would not easily be quenched. Far beyond the ridge, the first patrol banners flickered in the wind, closing in like a tide destined to wash away all uncertain dreams. And with them, a new reckoning loomed on. The horizon, one that would force them to confront not just the enemies outside, but the darkness brewing within the walls of their own fragile alliance. The ground trembled softly beneath distant hooves, shadows lengthening into figures cloaked in menace. And from deep within her eyes, a secret whispered, a vow that whatever came next, the frontier would never forget the fire they had ignited together. The settler's narrowed eyes bore into her as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rugged ridge where they stood. The secret she carried, the one heavy as the earth beneath their boots, hung between them, sharp and unyielding. His voice broke the silence, rough but steady. "I know what you carry." Her gaze didn't waver, pale and fierce under the thinning light. The weight of untold histories pressed down, but beneath her steely exterior, something fragile trembled. Hope, fragile and stubborn as the last bloom in a dying spring. She stepped down carefully from the ridge, moving slow, as if descending into the depths of memories no man should have to bear alone. "Are you ready to face what comes next?" Her question cut through the thinning air like a faint wind carrying smoke before a wildfire. The past does not let go easy. The river of old wounds twisted beneath their feet, mingling with the dust of the valley, unseen but felt. His jaw clenched, burdened as much by doubt as by years spent alone under the indifferent sky. The settlers won't wait for imperfections. They see the Apache in you as a threat. His voice cracked, heavy with a solitude worn like armor. "Me? They'll call me a fool for standing by your side." She closed the gap between them, the dry air shrinking as their worlds clashed and mingled. "Then we make them see," she breathed, voice low but fierce. "Not in gunfire, but in what we build, here, and in the hearts stubborn enough to believe there's something left worth fighting for." Silence wrapped them, thick and nearly suffocating, before the settlement's harsh life pulled at them. Days bled into each other, hands raw from fixing fences scarred by storms, hearts cautious and wrapped in the cords of newfound alliance. The wind whispered doubt through the cabins. Neighbors watched with the thin-lipped suspicion, grown from years of whispered grievances and shattered trust. Night draped the valley in velvet darkness when she appeared by the firelight, clutching a worn fragment of cloth. The faded embroidery was a ghost of a past long fought for, a symbol of a father lost to battles that stretched beyond their fragile peace. The settler traced the thread with a trembling hand, the weight of hope pressing heavy on his chest. "Hope," he murmured, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Weeks pressed on, testing the fragile alliance with relentless storms, hostile claim jumpers eyeing their land, and patrolling forces intolerant of such unions. Nights grew into long conversations, stripping away layers of pride and pain. She spoke of her Apache kin, the ceremonies beneath silver moons, the reverence for the land, a heritage carved into the very stones far older than any settler's claim. He spoke of love lost and the aching silence of solitude that settled in his bones like dust. One afternoon, a lone rider tore across the ridgeline, dust trailing like a specter behind him. The settler's breath caught, heart tightening in his chest. The rider's voice was tense, sharp-edged as a rattlesnake's warning. "Patrols coming at first light, hunting anyone seen with the Apache. You'll both be marked." The woman's eyes met his, a storm of unvoiced fear and fierce resolve. Every thread they had woven now threatened to unravel, the breaking point looming like a thunderstorm on the horizon. That night, as firelight danced and stretched, two figures sat side by side, with a silence thicker than smoke. Fingers brushed, a fleeting promise in a world that had taught them to expect betrayal. She whispered, "We've lost too much already. Maybe loss is the only teacher strong enough to show us what's worth holding." Their eyes locked, forging from the night a fragile resolve. The frontier was relentless, an unforgiving beast, but so was the fire ignited between two souls who refused to be broken. Beyond the ridge, the banners of the patrol stirred in the chilly wind. The sound of distant hooves beating a rhythm of looming reckoning. Shadows lengthened into figures, cloaked with menace, closing fast. From the depths of her gaze, a whispered vow stirred, a secret forged in pain and courage, that whatever came next, the fire they had kindled together would scar the frontier forever. Suddenly the distant shadows halted from the ridge's edge. A sharp cry pierced the night, a rifle shot, lone and echoing. The patrol's advance had faltered, but the danger was no less real. He rose swiftly, eyes dark with urgency. They know we're here now. Her hand found his, grip fierce. Then we fight, not just for ourselves, but for every forgotten soul who still dares to dream of peace. And as the valley held its breath, the first stars flickered above, a silent witness to a battle not yet begun, but inevitable. The ground beneath them trembled once more, this time with a steady drumming, hoofbeats multiplying in the distance, heralding a force far greater and closer than they had feared. The fragile light of dawn would soon give way to a storm not even hope could. Walk away from unscarred. The night air pressed heavy around them, thick with the scent of sagebrush and the distant promise of rain. She tightened her grip on his hand, the dry warmth a fragile tether in the vast silence that swallowed the valley. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the restless murmur of the approaching patrol drifted like a storm gathering at the edge of a thunderhead, inevitable, relentless. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, traced the shifting shadows. Each flicker of movement, a wordless warning, each distant hoofbeat, a drumbeat of doom pressing closer. But beneath that fierce vigilance, a quiet defiance kindled, a dark ember burning against the cold despair that had settled like dust after a drought. He studied her, the lines of war and weariness etched deep into his face, softening in the firelight, a fragile hope glimmering where once only mistrust had lived. They were not strangers to loss, not strangers to grief, but this alliance, carved from desperation, stirred something in both that whispered of survival beyond mere endurance. Tomorrow, at dawn, they will come, he said, voice low but resolute. They've hunted all who would stand with your people, and if they find us here— His words hung unfinished in the cold night, heavy as the earth beneath their feet. She nodded, the shadows beneath her cheekbones deepening like a silent vow. Then we stand, not just to fight, but to show them what they refuse to see, that the land holds more than grudges, that even broken souls can forge something new. Between them, the flickering firelight danced, illuminating the fragile lines of trust their hands now drew in the air. She could feel the tremor in his fingers, the same nervous pulse that echoed in her own veins, dread laced with determination. They spoke little after that, each moment stretched taut with anticipation. The valley seemed to hold its breath, the wind whispering secrets through the ragged pines and shattered rock. The small settlement lay restless, shadows lengthening under the watchful eyes of wary neighbors. The invisible weight of suspicion felt like a blade at their backs, sharper than any bullet. Morning came slow, the pale light spilling across the valley like spilled whiskey, golden and uncertain. When she stepped outside her cabin, a wind stirred beneath her skirts, carrying the faint scent of rain and the promise of reckoning. He was already waiting by the fence line, gaze fixed on the horizon where the patrol's banners would soon slice through the dawn like knives. They worked side by side, tightening the fence, their movements steady but filled with quiet urgency. Each nail driven, each post set a defiant gesture against the encroaching storm. The land beneath their fingertips was harsh and unforgiving. But here, in this moment, it was also their shared ground, their silent witness to a fragile hope. "Why do you risk this?" he asked abruptly, voice rough with something close to vulnerability. "You could vanish into the mountains, disappear into the wind." Her jaw tightened, the faintest shadow crossing her. "Because my people deserve more than to live in whispers and shadows." He paused, watching her, the weight of centuries settling between them like stones on a path. "And what of your past? The ghosts you carry, won't they hunt you even here?" Her breath caught, memories flooding like a cold river, names lost to time, faces haunted by blood and broken promises. But she squared her shoulders, the fire in her eyes steady. "The past is part of me, but it does not own me. Not anymore. Here, now, we choose what kind of story we'll tell." The first hoofbeats cracked the dawn's quiet, like thunder. From the ridge the rider burst into view, a figure carved in dust and determination. His eyes were hard, the lines of a man who had seen too much etched deep against his weathered skin. He reined in his horse mere yards from the fence, breath ragged, urgency raw. "They're closer than we feared," he said, voice tight, eyes darting behind him as if the very wind carried the enemy's footsteps. A battalion moving fast, hunting for every trace of Apache sympathizers. "They won't stop till they find you." The settler's grip clenched on the fence post, nails biting into wood. She stepped beside him, the pale dawn casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the earth. "Then we prepare," she said calmly, though inside a maelstrom roared. That afternoon disappeared beneath a sky heavy with threat. They gathered what they could, warning the village, securing the herds, mending fences that had been torn by storms and careless hands alike. The air was thick with tension, every crack, every whisper a possible herald of doom. At dusk, she found a moment alone near the creek that trickled like a fragile vein through the barren land. Water glistened, cool and clear, a rare mercy amid desolation. She cupped the liquid in her hands, watching it slip away between her fingers, a fleeting reminder of time lost and battles yet to come. The settler approached quietly, his presence a steadying force. "We can't outrun what's coming, but maybe we can stand against it." She met his gaze, the fierce quietness in her eyes, dissolving into something softer, yet infinitely resolute. "Together," she whispered, "for all the broken souls, for all the stolen dreams." Night fell quick and black, wrapping the valley in a cloak that carried both refuge and threat. Fires lit the settlement, casting long, trembling shadows as families gathered close, whispers of fear weaving through the air like smoke. Yet in their midst, two figures stood near the ridge's edge, a boundary between survival and the abyss. The patrol banners flickered distantly, ominous against the starry sky. The first shots were a sharp crack that shattered the fragile peace, a signal that the reckoning had come. He drew his rifle, eyes scanning the horizon, heart pounding a rhythm of primal warning. She whispered close, breath warm against the chill. No matter what falls tomorrow, they will know the fire we've ignited here. A sudden gust swept the ridge, carrying with it the smell of gunpowder and earth torn open. And then, beneath the rising moon, a voice cried out, a signal in the darkness. From the valley's edge, another shadow shifted, unseen, silent, a threat closer and deadlier than either dared to imagine. The ground trembled beneath the hooves racing toward them, and in that charged moment, as steel flashed and the night exploded alive with chaos, she realized the secret she carried was never just a burden. It was a reckoning, one that would either save them all or bury them beneath the unforgiving weight of history. The first rifle shot shattered the night's fragile silence, a single crack that echoed like a gunmetal scream through the valley. Hearts lurched and blood quickened beneath sun-baked skin as the distant patrol suddenly halted, their horsemen scattered like crows, caught in a sudden gust. The quiet that followed was heavier than any gunfire, a pause pregnant with unseen peril. In that suspended moment, she pressed against the rough bark of the twisted juniper tree, eyes burning through shadows that writhed beneath the silver moonlight. Her breath came steady, but her heart thudded a frantic rhythm, each beat a measured drum that refused to surrender. The secret she carried lay coiled inside her like a rattlesnake, restless and dangerous. A flicker of hope fought against the cold tendrils of fear. Beside her, the settler's fingers tightened on the rifle's worn stock, his gaze sharp and restless. Years of solitude had taught him the language of waiting, the dangerous art of patience at the edge of chaos. His eyes never left the ridge's tree line, where dark shapes melded into the night like ghosts hunting salvation. They're more cautious now, he whispered. They know we're not just hiding, that there's something here they don't understand. She met his gaze then, fierce and unflinching, beneath the dawn-stained sky. Something worth fighting for, she murmured, voice barely more than the wind, brushing dry leaves. The weight of old legacies wrapped around them like the desert night, harsh and unyielding, yet within it a glimmer of fragile light. The valley held its breath as the patrol's movements grew tentative, shadows weaving an ominous dance across the cracked earth. Their approach was no longer a march, but a stalking, each hoofbeat a dark note in a dirge of impending reckoning. Between the tension and the silence stretched the fragile thread of their uneasy alliance, too precious to sever, yet too frail to bear too much strain. She stepped forward, voice steady despite the knots twisting in her stomach. They won't find what they expect, she said, eyes scanning the horizon where the first pale hints of dawn began to bleed. We don't just survive by force. We survive because we adapt, because we remember who we are, even when the world tries to forget us. The settler nodded, that familiar line of resolve hardening in his jaw. You carry their pasts, their losses, their fires, But here, now, you fight with more than that. You fight with what none of them can take, the will to carve out a future. His words illuminated something buried, deep in the desert dust, a defiance that neither patrol nor prejudice could erase. But even as the dawn stretched pale fingers over the ridge, a shadow, darker than night itself, crept closer. The patrol surged forward, hooves beating a frantic rhythm, the cruel certainty of stalking hunters. The first who emerged from the tree line was not a man, but a child, eyes wide and searching, a trembling echo of innocence, wreathed in dust and despair. She knelt swiftly, heart lurching as she saw the faded markings of an Apache bracelet at the child's wrist, the settler's rifle lowered in a flicker of recognition and unspeakable sorrow. "They're taking the children," the girl whispered, voice cracking like dry earth. "To break the bloodline, to erase what we carry." The valley seemed to fold inward on itself, the cruel sun slipping behind jagged cliffs as if hiding from the brutal weight of that truth. The fragile hope they had nurtured trembled on the edge of ruin. He folded the child into his arms, the weight of generations pressing heavy upon his shoulders. "We stand," he said, voice raw but certain, "for every taken soul, for every lost prayer." Her fingers brushed a scar hidden beneath rough-spun sleeves, the remnants of a wound that spoke not just of pain, but survival. "And we fight, not just to keep alive the past, but to ignite a new dawn." Suddenly, a crack from the ridge's far edge split the night, the whistle of an arrow, the whisper of steel slicing air. Instinct flared as the settler dropped low, firing a sharp volley that scattered the advancing patrol. The child's frightened wail was swallowed by the tumult. The fierce quietness in her eyes deepened, a fire lit by dread and unyielding hope. This was no longer a battle for land or survival alone. It was the precarious war for the soul of a people, for the fragile threads that still bound them to the earth. As the settlers behind them scrambled to defense, voices rose in a chaotic chorus, the collision of old hatreds, new fears, and the raw urgency of desperate lives tangled in a storm that would not be denied. She stood firm atop the ridge, silhouette carved against relentless dawn, heart pounding a solemn vow. No matter how many were lost, how deep the shadows grew, the fire they kindled in the valley would burn, fierce and unforgotten, through the storms yet to come. Below, the patrol faltered again, but from the darkness stepped a figure who did not fear the fire. Cloaked in a coat stolen from death itself, his eyes were a cold mirror of long-buried grudges and unspoken truths. He spoke once, voice cutting like a knife across the turmoil. "The past you carry is not your own to bear alone. There are debts that blood must pay." The settler's hand clenched the rifle, the woman's breath caught tight in her chest, and beyond the ridge, the first trembling notes of betrayal echoed like thunder. The very walls they had built to protect their fragile peace were beginning to crumble from within. The rifle shot cracked through the stillness of night, a deafening echo that spat fire into the cold air. Horses whinnied, Hooves scrambled against the rocky soil, and the valley stirred awake with the sharp scent of impending violence. She pressed her back against the rough juniper bark, fingers curling into the coarse rind as her breath steadied. Steady, controlled, though beneath the calm, her heart hammered like war drums. The settler crouched low beside her, eyes blazing in the moonlight as they traced the shadowed tree line. Every muscle taut, every sense stretched thin. The patrol's advance had faltered, unnerved by the single shot that shattered their rhythm. But even in their hesitation, danger resided, silent, lurking, a predator emboldened by uncertainty. "They're circling," he whispered, "hunting more carefully now. They no, we're not just shadows to be swept away." Her gaze met his, pale eyes fierce, burning like embers. "Fierce enough to fight," she answered softly. "Not just for ourselves, but for what still breathes in this land. The blood, the memories, the stubborn fire of our people." The night folded around them, thick and suffocating. The valley held its breath beneath the silver dome of the moon, every leaf and stone swallowed in silence, burdened with a tired hope that refused to die. Their pact, fragile as cracked earth, yet unyielding as the mountains, was stretched tight between wary hands. She stepped forward, voice barely more than a breath against the howl of the wind. "They won't understand what we protect here. No amount of bullets will reach the roots we've buried deep." His jaw set as dawn's first faint fingers began to stain the horizon a weary gold. "You carry more than your own scars, but here and now we carve new marks, ones they can't erase." A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of her lips, a brief flame of defiance against the chokehold of despair. But even as the dawn crept closer, shadows leapt from the tree line, bodies flowing like spilled ink across the cracked earth. The first figure that broke through was not a man, but a child, eyes wide, unseeing for a moment, lost in dust and fear. The bracelet of faded beadwork clung to her wrist, a fragile thread tying her to a past most wished buried. The settler's rifle dropped softly as sorrow overwhelmed. "Caution. They take the children," she whispered, voice trembling with betrayal. "To sever the bloodline, to erase us." The valley recoiled in silent grief. The fragile hope they had for their union trembled on the verge of shattering. He rose with the weight of centuries on his shoulders, folding the child close. "We stand. For every soul stolen, every dream shattered, we fight." Her hand brushed a hidden scar beneath worn sleeves, a crucible of pain and survival etched deep into her flesh. "And from that pain, we kindle a new dawn." Suddenly, a sharp crack tore through the tension, an arrow's whistle. Instinct propelled them both into motion. The settler's rifle roared, a hail of steel scattering their foes, violence born of desperate hope. The child's frightened cry was swallowed by the roar of conflict. Her eyes smoldered, dark coals fueled by rage and fragile determination. This was no longer the fight for mere survival. It was a war for the soul itself, for the ancient threads that bound her people to the land. Behind them, the settlement stirred, voices rising in chaos and fear, the clashing of old wounds and new alliances, tearing at the fragile seams they'd stitched. She stood tall, a silhouette against the rising sun, heart hammering with the weight of an unspoken vow. No matter how fierce the night, the fire they've ignited will burn long after smoke clears. From the fractured patrol emerged a figure wrapped in shadows deeper than night, eyes cold and unblinking, an echo of grudges older than the valley itself. "The past you carry isn't just yours," he said, voice as sharp as a knife's edge. "There are debts, and blood must repay them." The settler's grip tightened around his rifle. Her breath hitched, danger closer than any arrow or bullet. Above the ridge, a whisper of treachery unfolded, the walls of their fragile peace beginning to crumble under unseen hands. Then, as the sky began to bleed gold, a distant whistle cut through the dawn, the unmistakable cry of betrayal. Steeling herself, she met his gaze. "We're not just fighting shadows, we're facing the storm within." The ground trembled beneath distant hooves, horses racing toward a reckoning heavier than either had dared to imagine. And in that charged moment, beneath a sky bruised with early light, the secret she carried stirred like wildfire, not a curse to break them, but a reckoning to ignite the frontier's soul once and for all. The early chill of dawn clung stubbornly to the ridge as she stepped down from the jagged edge, each footfall deliberate, weighed with unseen burdens. He watched her descent, the secret lingering between them, like a shadow cast long before the sun touched the valley floor. His eyes, sharp and wary, traced the stiffness in her posture, pride mingled with pain, as if she carried the weight of the ages in her very bones. "I've seen what you carry," he said, voice low, rough cut with a mixture of awe and the unspoken fear of a man standing on the precipice of a world he barely understood. She paused briefly, her pale gaze steady, beneath the violet bruises of morning light. The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring, then broke with a fragile promise carried on her breath. "Are you prepared to face what lies beyond this valley? The ghosts buried under every cracked stone?" He swallowed hard, the cold air biting at his throat. "Choices are scarce when the world's hunting you. The settlers see you as a threat, and me as a fool for standing beside you. They don't wait for patience or approval." Her eyes softened, a flicker of something hidden, a fleeting ember of hope beneath layers of resilience. "Then we'll show them a different kind of strength, not the roar of guns, but the quiet defiance of survival, of building something worth saving." They moved through the settlement, like two shadows bound by necessity, hands rough but steady as they repaired fences scarred by storms and desperation. The air was thick with whispers, old suspicions curling through the cabins like smoke, eyes narrowing with every tentative step they took together. Yet, in the shifting currents of that distrust, a fragile thread tethered their fates tighter than either dared to admit. One evening, as the sun sank behind the skeletal ridge, she emerged from the fading light, holding a tattered cloth embroidered with the faded symbols of her people. "This belonged to my father," she said softly, voice cracking with the weight of memory. "A man who fought to protect the little hope we had left." His fingers traced the fragile stitches, trembling beneath the burden of unspoken loss. "Hope is the rarest thing in these parts," he murmured, "for all of us." Weeks passed, each day a silent test, a surge of wind, a shadow on the horizon, the ever-looming threat of patrols that hunted those who dared cross lines drawn in prejudice and fear. Their alliance, fragile as desert glass, was smoothed and reshaped by shared struggle, each moment pulling them toward a future neither could yet see. Then one dusk, the sharp, frantic beat of hooves shattered the cold calm. A lone rider tore across the ridge, his face a mask carved from dust and dread. "The patrol's coming at first light," he warned, voice tight with urgency. "They're hunting Apache sympathizers and anyone with ties to you. They'll mark you for death." Their eyes met then, hers. Fierce with resolve, his shadowed by the weight of what was to come. The threads they had woven so carefully threatened to unravel beneath the burden of hatred old as these lands. That night, by the flickering fire, words were scarce but heavy. Their fingers brushed, a silent vow kissed by the desert wind. "We've already lost too much," she whispered. "But sometimes loss teaches us the worth of what remains." He nodded. The firelight reflecting the fracture lines in his solitude. "Then we stand, not just for us, but for every forgotten soul still daring to dream." The moon hung low, casting long shadows that seemed to ripple with menace as banners flickered beyond the ridge. The distant hoofbeats grew louder, a relentless tide headed straight for the fragile bastion they'd forged. Suddenly, a sharp cry split the night, a rifle shot, sudden and bright, shattering the silence and sending ripples of chaos through the sleeping valley. The patrol faltered in confusion, but danger had only just begun to cast its long shadow. She gripped his arm tightly. "They know we're here now." His jaw clenched, every fiber taut with the knowledge that retreat was no longer an option. "Then we fight, for the past we carry, and the future we dare to build." From the ridge's edge, a figure emerged, a man cloaked in darkness, deeper than the night itself. His eyes were cold mirrors, reflecting grudges that stretched beyond memory. "The debts you carry," he spat, voice like steel scraping stone, "are not yours alone. Blood must pay." Blood. The settler's hand tightened on his rifle. Her breath hitched. The fragile peace they had cultivated teetered on a knife's edge, poised to be shattered not just by enemies without, but by betrayals within. And just as the first gray light of dawn spilled over the valley, a distant whistle sliced the silence, a haunting call that promised the storm was about to break in ways neither could yet comprehend. The night hung heavy, thick with shadows that folded like an unforgiving shroud over the valley. The echo of that lone rifle shot lingered, haunting, insistent, rippling through the still air and stitching a tense silence between them. She pressed her back against the coarse juniper trunk, breath steady, but her heart burning like tinder ready to ignite. The secret she bore was no longer hers alone. It now stretched like a taut wire between them, humming with raw urgency. His hands gripped the worn stock of his rifle tighter, knuckles pale beneath calloused skin. Years spent alone on endless, dust-bitten trails had honed this moment into an instinctive sharpness. His gaze never left the shifting tree line, where darkness rippled like restless water beneath the indifferent moon. They had been patient, slow to move, But now the hunters circled, cautious and hungry. "They know we're not shadows to be chased away," he whispered, voice rough with wind and weariness. "They sense something here, something they can't take with bullets." Her eyes burned steady, fierce as tempered steel. "They don't understand what we hold," she breathed. "They'll never grasp that survival is more than firepower. It's rooted in blood, memory, and a stubborn hope that refuses to die." The valley itself seemed to hold its breath, every cracked stone and dying scrub tight with tension. Theirs was an alliance, fragile as sun-baked earth, stretched tight between raw mistrust and unspoken necessities. But in the stillness, a spark flickered, the faintest ember of something new. She stepped forward, voice barely more than a dry wind brushing through dead leaves. "They hunt a shadow they cannot catch. What they don't see is what we're building, something that gunfire can't touch." The settler's jaw hardened as dawn's first gray fingers stained the horizon. "You carry histories heavier than these hills. But here, with me, we etch a story they can't erase." A brief ghost-like smile flickered at the corner of her mouth before darkness spilled from the tree line like spilled ink. Figures slipped forward, dark silhouettes melted into the broken earth. The stillness shattered. The first to emerge wasn't a man, but a child, eyes wide with fledgling fear, clutching at a faded bracelet strung with worn beads, like a fragile thread wound tightly around memory and loss. His rifle lowered in a ghost of recognition and sorrow. "They take the children," she whispered, voice breaking like cracked earth, "to sever the bloodline, to erase us." The valley seemed to shudder beneath the cruel weight of that truth. Hope, a delicate flame they had nurtured, trembled on the razor's edge of destruction. He folded the child close, the burden of centuries settling deep in his bones. "We stand," he said, voice raw with bitter certainty. "For every soul lost, every dream stolen, we fight." Her fingers brushed a hidden scar beneath rough sleeves, a mark carved by pain and survival entwined. "And from that pain, we forge a new dawn." Suddenly, the night split with the sharp whistle of an arrow. Instinct flared. The settler dove low, fingers tight on the rifle, sending a hail of gunfire that scattered the hunters like startled crows. The child's cry was swallowed by the roar of chaos. Her eyes blazed, a dark fire fueled by rage and fragile hope. This was no longer about mere survival. It was a war for the pulse of a people, for the threads binding them deep to this unforgiving land. Behind them, the settlement stirred, a cacophony of fear and defiance rising amid the cracked wooden homes. The clash of ancient wounds and new alliances tore at the fragile seams they had sewn together. She stood tall, silhouette sharp against the rising sun, heart pounding with an unyielding vow. No matter how long the night, the fire they had sparked would burn fierce, untamed, unforgotten. From the fractured ranks of the patrol emerged a figure darker than the night's own shadow. Cloaked in menace, his eyes reflected grudges deeper than the valley's scars, ancient wounds refusing to heal. "The debts you bear," he spat, voice steel-edged and cruel, "are not yours alone. blood must pay blood. The settler's grip tightened on the rifle. She caught her breath. Danger, closer than any arrow or bullet. Behind their backs, the first tremors of betrayal began to ripple through the fragile peace. Walls built on tentative trust started cracking, unseen and deadly. As dawn bled cold gold across the valley floor, a distant, sharp whistle cut the fragile air, a call twisted with menace and dread. Steeling herself against the rising storm, she met his gaze with fire still burning fierce. They're not just hunting shadows out here. This is a war, and the enemy is closer than either of us dared to imagine. The first light of dawn spilled pale over the valley, touching the cracked earth and long shadows with a fragile gold. The patrol's distant hooves hammered ever nearer, a relentless drumbeat that weighed heavy on the souls of those who waited. At the ridge's edge, she stood tall, the secret she bore simmering beneath her skin, a flame neither broken nor hidden. Beside her, the settler's fingers tightened on the rifle, eyes scanning the horizon with a fierce quietness that mirrored her own. "Their numbers grow," he whispered, voice low but steady. "But we are not alone." She nodded, breath steady despite the fire roaring in her chest. "No, because our strength is not in numbers, but in what we carry inside. The stories, the blood, the land itself. They think they hunt shadows, but we are roots and fire." Behind them, the settlement stirred awake, the houses weathered but standing. Faces appeared in doorways, worn, wary, eyes cautious but hopeful. The fragile thread that had tied settler and Apache together through months of fear and struggle was tested now by the looming storm. Yet in every gaze there burned a quiet resolve. This valley was theirs to defend, not with hatred, but with the fierce will to survive and protect what fragile peace had been forged. The child from the previous night, clasped close to the settler's side, stirred, restless, but safe. Her small fingers gripped the worn bracelet, a symbol of a lineage many sought to erase. But here and now, it was a talisman of hope, of a future not yet lost. The first volleys erupted suddenly, the sharp crack of rifles and the thunder of charging hooves fracturing the fragile dawn. She moved with precise grace, feet sure on the rough earth as she called out commands, her voice carrying calm authority amid chaos. Around her, settlers and kin alike rallied. Fences were reinforced, defenses raised, the valley becoming a crucible of survival. Amid the fray, the figures of the patrol pushed forward, faces grim and hard, shaped as much by fear as by the cruelty of their mission. But the alliance stood firm. He fought beside her, wily, fierce, with a quiet power born of years shaped by solitude and loss. Together, their movements wove a story of resistance. Each action a declaration they would not be broken. In the heart of battle, a moment froze. An arrow glanced off the settler's shoulder. He stumbled, but held firm. She rushed to his side, sweeping his hair back, eyes searching his own for reassurance, born not of words, but trust carved in blood and fire. "Hold steady," she said, voice low, each word a promise. And he did. As dawn spilled wider, bleeding into day, the tide began to shift. The patrol's momentum faltered under the unexpected unity of those who called this land home. Not just settlers, not just Apache, but a shared hope forged in bitter soil. The man cloaked in shadow, the embodiment of old grudges and whispered betrayals, fell back, his cold eyes flickering with reluctant respect. You fight not just for yourselves, but for a future no one dared offer, he growled before retreating into the thinning dark. Breath heaving, bodies bruised but unbowed, those who remained stared across the valley at the sun climbing over the barren ridges. The raid had been repelled. The settlement exhaled as one, a mixture of relief and somber mourning for those irretrievably lost amid the dust and gunfire. Yet beneath the grief lay an undeniable truth. The fragile alliance had been tempered in fire and had endured. Later, as the valley fell into a rare silence, she and the settler sat together by the remnants of the fire that had witnessed promises and fears alike. The child slept peacefully between them, a small beacon in the vast wilderness. I was wrong, he admitted softly, voice rough with exhaustion and newfound understanding. I believed survival meant standing alone, carrying burdens in silence. But you showed me it means standing together. Her gaze softened, tracing the horizon, where wildflowers, once too fragile even to dream, now pushed through cracked soil toward the sun. I carry the weight of the past, but it no longer defines me. Here and now, we choose what to build, not just to endure, but to live. Their hands found each other's, fingers entwining with a conviction that words could never fully capture. Between them lay a promise, not only to survive, but to heal the land, their people, and the wounds stitched deep by centuries. Far off on the ridge, the wind stirred the dust, carrying with it the echoes of battles, losses, and dreams reclaimed. The valley stood quiet, but alive, cradling that precious ember of hope forged between two worlds. Above, the pale morning light burned away the last shadows of night, painting a new beginning across the vast wild expanse. And in that gentle dawn, the fire they had kindled together would never be extinguished.